Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 14 of our monthly Meet the Experts Q&A sessions with Sintons Employment Team. My name is David Pritchard and I'm the head of marketing here at Sintons. Just going to quickly move the slides on so you can see just our faces and our details and also the topics for a day. Once again, and I know I do this at the start of every one of these sessions, thank you so much for all your positive comments, for signing up to the sessions. We've got over 1,000 people listening this morning, which is absolutely phenomenal. So thank you for tuning in each week and now each month, for still continuing to send in your questions, for watching the videos afterwards and listening to the podcasts. We are so glad that these sessions continue to add value to you. Quite a bit to talk about today. So as with previous weeks, employment team are going to answer 3 questions. Our speakers today, as you've just seen, are Head of Employment Keith Land and Associate Ailsa Hobson. So Keith is going to go first this morning. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you straight over to him. Keith, good morning and over to you.
Thanks, David. Morning, everyone. Wow, where to start? We timed this well this week, didn't we? There's masses to talk about because there's masses going on. We've had a bit of a lull, but Mr. Johnson's cracking the whip a bit, isn't he? So Rishi Sunak's latest version of the furlough scheme, the job support scheme, where do I start? I suppose looking at it, Mr. Sunak borrowed 36 billion in August. Okay, just to put that in perspective, it took the government a decade to save that same number via cuts within the public sector and things like that. So it is a colossal sum of money. You might have seen it, breaking news, the total UK debt has passed 2 trillion, which is the first time it's happened in history. I read one stat last night that said the deficit in the UK could be 400 billion by the end of the year, which is up with the levels of World War II. And I know there's been some comments about Mr. Johnson trying to be Churchillian, but I'm not really sure we're at that perspective yet. Tax collected, tax receipts are down, given furlough schemes, VAT, holidays and things like that. So some will say that Mr. Sunak has been a bit stingy with his latest version of the job support scheme, but I think you've got to put that in the context of the economic position and the total debt. Whilst he's gone out there to support jobs, he's being widely criticised because this scheme is only touching on viable jobs, and there's certain sectors that remain closed, that as employees are not doing any time at work, this scheme won't apply to them. There is a fact sheet out there at this point in time. There's no direct HMRC direction or regulations, so the information is relatively scant, but if you just Google job support scheme, it will link you to the latest fact sheet, which I'll skirt through. As I've said, the scheme is to protect viable jobs in businesses which are facing lower demand due to the pandemic. What the government is saying, it's to target those businesses who need most support at this point in time. But again, I stress, there are some businesses that remain closed. Those a nightclub, for example, they can't operate at this point in time, and therefore it would leave those businesses completely out in the cold, which I'm not sure is right. And there's some rising criticism in that respect, is the best way I'd put it. How does the scheme work? Well, in effect, the government will pay up to 1/3 of hours not worked, so long as the employer matches that, and so all told, an employee will earn a minimum of 77% of their normal wages whilst they're not working a full working week. Okay, I'll explain a bit more detail how that works in a minute. It runs from the 1st of November and will run from 6 months until April 2021. Who's eligible? Well, all employers that have a UK bank account. You don't need to have previously used the job retention or furlough scheme. Large businesses will have a financial assessment, which will be worked on the basis that their profits and income have dropped. Small and medium-sized enterprises will not have the same financial assessment to join the scheme. The expectation is also that if you are in the large employer category, you'll not be making capital distributions such as dividend payments or share buyback during the next 6-month period. Employees must be on the payroll on or before September 23rd, and that's the real-time information payroll. For the first 3 months of the scheme, employees must work at least 33% of their normal hours to qualify for some kind of support under the scheme. After 3 months, I suppose the government will look at where they are, and they may alter the 33% minimum threshold and perhaps increase it. I don't know what will happen. We'll have to see. Who knows what will happen at the moment? Employees can cycle on and off. OK, they don't have to work the same working pattern each month, but they must work. For blocks of a week, it looks like, or a period of 7 days, let's say. The government's contribution is capped, £697.92 per month. The grant will not cover Class 1 employers' national insurance contributions or pension contributions. They will remain payable by the employer. How do you calculate usual wages? Follow the same rules that you followed under the job retention scheme, the furlough scheme, if you were part of that. So employers must effectively have employees doing at least 33% of their normal working hours during the week. I can see Ailsa, my colleague, yawning her head off. Sorry, I'm that boring, Ailsa. Anyway, employees, must work 33% of their usual hours. So in effect, they get paid their normal rate of pay for that time worked. So they can then be not working for 2/3 of their usual working week. And for that 2/3, the employer will pay the employee 1/3. The government will pay the employee 1/3 up to its cap, and the employee will suffer a hit for the other third. Employees cannot be made redundant or put on notice for the period that the employer is claiming. Like the furlough scheme, and don't fall into the trap in this respect, because some of our clients did at the front end of the furlough scheme, you must agree the new short-time working arrangements with your employees. Changes must be made to the contract by agreement, and they must be committed to writing. This is where some employers fell foul. They agreed something verbally with their employees, didn't put it in writing. HMRC can look at the contract variations on request, so you have to get something down in writing. That's the information I have right now. A quick example for you, which is in the guidance note that's out there already. If you assume that an employee works 5 days a week and they earn 350 quid gross, company suffers reduced sales, so they put that employee on 2 days a week, working 40% of their usual hours. The employer would pay that employee £140 for the days that she works. For the time she's not working, 3 days or 60% of her working hours, that is worth £210. She'll earn 2/3 of that, so £140, of which £70 will be paid by the government and £70 by the employer, and the employee will then take a hit on the final third. So in a sense, she gets total earnings of £280, which is 80% of her normal wage. There's a little example and a little table at the back of the guidance note, which is quite useful to see how it can work. But obviously, don't forget that for your higher income people, the government's cap will kick in at the £697 per month, and so this scheme may not really work for you. That's all we know now. Clearly, more guidance will come out, and that will develop in time. That's all I have to say on that. I'll pass you over to Ailsa if she hasn't yet fallen asleep.
Thanks, Keith. I promise I wasn't yawning as a result of the topic. It was purely just the way you were telling it. So, topic interesting. Keith, not so much. Anyway, I'll move on to the next question, which is to do with agile working. So since COVID-19 raised its ugly head, a lot of businesses have had to change the way that they operate and change the way that they're asking their staff to undertake their day-to-day duties. A lot of this has meant, for many, working from home. So this working from home placed a huge pressure on our IT systems. I'm sure it did for ours anyway. I'm sure it did for many of yours, to make sure that things were working from home efficiently and securely, and from a number of different locations. So it also put a lot of pressure on managers to ensure that staff were being effective and productive while at home, while not under their watchful eye. And also on the staff themselves, who have to adapt to a very new way of working in a new working environment, which comes with its other distractions. So what's come out of this mess, so to speak, is the possibility for a new way of working. And a lot of employers, for a variety of different reasons, are looking to introduce agile working to their workforce. Some by way of an option open to employees to apply or request an agile work, I suppose, system, and others are looking to take a more forceful approach and look to change terms and conditions eventually. Some by consent, and others maybe through more stringent means. I suppose it depends on how you're operating right now. So agile working in an organisation gives employers and their staff the power or possibility to make decisions about when, how and where they undertake their work. It can be split into 4 distinct categories. So time, when do people work? For example, part-time, shifts. Can they work flexibly? Do you operate core hours? Location, so where do people work? For example, home working, split across multiple sites. Do you operate some form of hot desking system? What role they're doing, so are you looking to multi-skill people? Are you considering secondments, job rotations? Source, so who is employed, so it's the types of people that you're engaging, so permanent employees, casual staff, self-employed, and maybe you're outsourcing or bringing employees in from elsewhere to fulfill certain roles. So but for the purposes of this Q&A, I'm just going to focus on the first 2 categories. So that'll be time and location, because I think they're probably the key ones we're considering at the moment for any changes to our working operations. So clearly home working is the biggie, following the government's decision to ask those who can to work from home, and reiterate that, I suppose, again more recently. At first this was a strange concept for most, probably one that employers shied away from if they ever received a request for home working through their flexible working policies. As it was, however, we all had to get used to this way of working pretty quickly, so thank heavens for Teams, and it wasn't worth all that whinging pre-COVID, now was it, Keith? It's been a great advantage, I think, to many. So with home working came reduced electricity bills, for employers anyway, and maybe a reduced need to continue to operate an office space, or perhaps more room to spread out and social distance for those that couldn't operate from home and needed to come into the office. It also introduced a new way of working for a lot of people, so agile working policies and considerations are becoming more and more common now, hence us dealing with this question. And now really is the time to get these up and running, so that you have, I suppose, more of a structure in place if and when things resume to some form of normality. So now this is not a one-size-fits-all, because home working isn't an option for some people, either because they require adjustments to perform their role, which maybe can't be replicated at home. They may not have a suitable workplace within their home, and due to a whole host of reasons, isolation or working in isolation might not be conducive to their mental health. So these few things are likely to trigger the Equality Act, and so this is another reason to do your due diligence before you instruct your workforce that you're going to be changing the method or the way in which they're going to be operating or working, including from home. So what are the benefits to home working? Skills retention, workers who might otherwise be lost because of things like family relocation, new family responsibilities, temporary or permanent disabilities. They may be able to be offered permanent or temporary appropriate arrangements which allow them to work from home, so you're retaining a skill set that might otherwise be lost if you couldn't accommodate adjustments within the workplace. Team flexibility, so geography and travel time are less of an issue, and teams of workers can be assembled more easily, yes, remotely, but it gives you that option. Things might get done a lot more quickly. Organisations geared to be home working also might be better able to withstand things like disruptions because of transport problems, adverse weather conditions, no one can have a snow day anymore, and even terrorist threats, I suppose, at a far-reaching end. And established home working can form a big part of a disaster management plan. So I suppose it can have its benefits beyond just the day-to-days. But there are reasons why organisations might be reluctant to embrace home working. Things like loss of control and damage to team working and culture. Sometimes you can lose that if you're not having that day-to-day contact. Different management styles may be required to oversee home workers, and some managers might not be able to support workers to the same degree as they would ordinarily. The business might become overly dependent on technology, and you might have significant duplication of equipment. And you might not, well, you're going to rely heavily really on trust for your staff working at home unless you have a good way of monitoring productivity. And you might worry that not everyone will pull their weight. Well, hopefully everybody would, but obviously there's performance improvement plans in place for a reason, which might mean that some people take advantage of that. So it's ways and means of monitoring it that might make you a bit more fearful of putting these processes in place. You've also got to consider the potential for confidentiality and data security breaches as well, because it's not, again, all within the buildings in which you operate. So contractual considerations, there are going to be variations to the contract that you'll need to make, either through consent or, I suppose, at the far end of things, if you choose to enforce it, dismissal and re-engagement on new terms. Things you want to consider is the place of work. So what will be their principal place of work? If they're predominantly going to be working from home, will it be home, or is there going to be a split work from home, work in the office, or a few days from home, a few days in the office? Again, that flexibility is something you need to work through with your staff. But if it is going to be the principal place of work is their home, this can impact on travel expenses. And if you require them to travel, I suppose, away from their home or come into the office as and when you require them to do so. So that actual travel time from home to the office, which currently, if the office is their principal place of work, then becomes an expense which they can claim back. So it's factoring in that as a financial implication. Hours of work, so what will these look like? One of the biggest selling points for agile working is the ability for the employees to work around other commitments. So things like childcare, for example, or doctor's appointments, or even hair appointments if you can only get your hair appointment during the middle of the day. So do you need your staff to work 9 to 5 and be available for those hours? Or are you happy for them to do core hours and be available at specific times and then work those other hours around other commitments that they have? I think that's always going to be a big selling point for staff if they can have that flexibility. But again, provided it works for your business and you feel comfortable with how you're going to monitor the hours actually being performed. It is crucial to establish the boundaries of working time, and in particular when the home worker will be available. And I suppose another thing to factor in is the working time regulations. If they're at home, you're less likely to be able to monitor the hours they're working and the rest breaks they're taking. So the contractor will want to specify that's now their responsibility to ensure that compliance. Salary, you need to make sure that there's no less advantageous salary or benefit implications for working from home. They still get access to all the benefits and the facilities that those working from the office would still get. Equipment, so decide who's going to pay for the equipment, who's going to provide the equipment, and who can have access to it. So there's going to be monitoring, so there's still going to be the need to monitor things like emails, outgoing, the work, and also you might want to reserve the right to enter the home where the equipment is going to be used to maintain, install and service those that equipment. You need to deal with recovery on termination and also access to carry out health and safety risk assessments, because that's still going to be a requirement that you'll need to satisfy. You should also consider having the right to revert back to original working practices, because it's not going to be a case that every single element of home working might work. You might decide at a later time actually this isn't working, or because of the productivity of that individual that you've identified through maybe your performance processes, home working isn't something that you continue. So you need to have that right to revert back to coming into the office if that's what you prefer. You might also consider a trial period to trial out these proposed working arrangements, similar to, I suppose, flexible working if the request comes in that way. It's better to agree to a trial period and see how it works, even though we've had quite a big one, I suppose, recently, but it still might be slightly different, to see if it works in the longer term. So I've just touched upon here, sorry, I'm going on a bit, I know, is there 3 questions that we've had in, well, we've had more than 3, but I picked 3 key ones that were really, I suppose, must be playing on people's mind when it comes to agile work. So the first one was, what questions can the employers ask? I know sometimes employers can get a bit cautious about questioning what's going on in the home, especially if it can trigger things like the Equality Act. So you need to be satisfied as employers that the worker has a suitable place to work at home. So sitting on your couch with your laptop on your knees, probably not the healthiest way to, well, do anything really, because I suppose it falls out of the health and safety requirements to sit at certain angles and things at certain levels. And what you don't want to do is find yourself in a situation where someone's suffering an injury sustained through, I suppose, poor posture management while sitting on their sofa doing their work from a laptop that could then become your responsibility. So you need to be able to ask relevant questions about the workstation. And while most employers usually steer clear of asking express questions about childcare, if childcare is going to be an issue, it's essential for you to know what appropriate arrangements have been made. So an employee can't simultaneously work and care for a very young child at the same time. I mean, I know a lot of people have had to do that through this time, but again, if that's not going to be something that's forced upon people moving forward, you need to make sure that people have appropriate childcare in place at the times that they're operating from home. And I think from that context, it's perfectly acceptable for you to ask those questions. You still have to make sure that you're asking the same questions of both male and female employers, just because you want to avoid any accusations there of discrimination. So second question, can a worker be made to work at home? So if you've got something in your contract already that says principal places work is at home, then yes, of course, you can require them to work at home. But if you're wishing to impose home working at a later date or now, this would constitute a variation to the contract, so that requires the employer's consent. At a last resort, you can impose home working if you can't obtain consent by offering new terms for old. But, well, so I suppose in other words, you're dismissing and re-engaging them on under a new contract. But you have to make sure that your business reason for moving to a home working is sufficiently compelling. Otherwise, you'll find yourself at risk there of an unfair dismissal claim, and it'll be very difficult to defend if you don't have a good justifiable business reason to shift that working arrangement from office into home. Last question, so must an employer permit home working? So employees don't have the right to work at home. It's not a blanket right. I think obviously we're working under guidance at the moment that if you can do, but a lot of employers may have decided that actually you can't work productively from home, so we actually need you to come into the office. The office is a COVID secure environment, so we need you to come back. That's perfectly acceptable. But there are certain circumstances where you do have to consider the request. For example, if it comes in through the flexible working legislation, so there you have to consider it and look at your business reason for refusing it. If that's what you're going to do, you've got your 8 business reasons, and you also have to factor in any risk of a claim for sex or disability discrimination, which is possible. So you have to be able to again justify your reason, because some of the requests, well, a lot of requests that come in are linked to childcare and potential disabilities to factor in other elements going on in their life. So I think it's important again to make sure you're covering off all aspects that you would usually in a flexible working request alongside those business demands before you make that decision. So there is actually a lot to factor in with agile working, and that's obviously only dealing with 2 of the points out of the 4 that I suppose embody what agile working is, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a starting point of things to consider. So it's not just a case of carry on as you have been. We need to look at it a bit more structure so that you can continue to work comfortably moving forward. So that's it from me. I'll pass you back to Keith for the final question.
Thanks. That sort of leads into my final question. I put working from home September 2020, as you'll see on the slide, because I had a number of clients pick up the telephone and say, well, what is the current government latest change of position by the government do for us? Because we've all gone home. in accordance with the way the wind blew 2 months ago or whenever, we've all started to get people back, and now the wind's changed again, and what do we do? And what's the government position currently? Is it mandatory? Is it not? And so there's a lot of confusion around it. So I know Ailsa's talked a lot on agile working and the requirements to get somebody working from home. And if that works for your organisation, great. If it doesn't, you know, where are you? Well, look, the current guidance on working from home is that it is guidance. It is not one of the mandatory rules. Okay, it says the guidance is such that office workers who can work effectively from home should do so over the winter period. Okay, now who determines what is working effectively? Thankfully, in some respects, from an employer's perspective, it's sufficiently vague. The government goes on and tries to clarify it and sort of says when an employer, in consultation with their employee, judges an employee can carry out their normal duties from home, they should do so. That clearly puts the decision slap dab in the lap of the employer, in my view. It says, you know, when an employer, with some discussion with the employee, judges an employee can carry out the normal duties, they should do so. But it's all about effective work. And what is effective work? There is sufficient room in that for most employers to say, well, actually, does that mean that somebody is doing their job? And when I say doing their job, I don't mean 70% of it. I mean, can they work effectively and do their job at home? If not, well, actually, I think you have a right to say no. You need to come in and do your job in the workplace. Now, with all of these things, you've got to weigh up all of the kind of things that Ailsa has just talked about. There are greater factors in this choice, such as flexibilities, freedoms, retention issues. But from my perspective, the power as it stands is guidance. That sits with the employer. The fact of the matter is that the underlying contractual entitlement that sits there at the moment will likely be your place of work is the office, for example, and therefore that would have to be changed for good reasons. An employer doesn't have to change it if it doesn't really want to. That's the legal position. What the guidance goes on to say is the risk of transmission can be substantially reduced if COVID-19 secure guidelines are followed in the workplace. So I think the government has a bit of a mixed message here. On the one hand, they're saying office workers can go home, but if your office place is COVID secure, it's okay for them to work there too. For example, as Ailsa said at the front end, there may be childcare issues. Frankly, I come to the office every day and and continue to do so at times through lockdown to get away from my 3 kids who are at home, because otherwise I would I would probably just go deaf, because all they do is fight with one another. But joking aside, I now have to travel half an hour to bring them into the office, to bring them into school. I would then have to turn the car around and go home again. I figure I can't work effectively in that way, so I am going to be coming into the office. The place is secure. We have our COVID secure rules, our one-way systems, hand sanitizing stations, and all of those things. And we all sit 2 meters apart. Let's face it, I would prefer to sit as far away from Ailsa as possible. No, that's only a joke. So we actually sit quite close together, but not within the 2 meters. So really, there's no compulsion for people to work at home. It comes down to your individual operations. I'm conscious we've been on a while. I was going to deal with a few other things, which I will just rattle through, because there's been a number of changes this week. Some are legal, some aren't. Face coverings in private hire vehicles and taxis, now law, got to put one on. Hospitality venues must wear face coverings except when you're seated at a table to eat or drink. Craziest rule on the planet. I was in France in the summer and they had this rule in true Gallic fashion. Whenever the French meet their mates, don't they? They go up and they kiss each other on each cheek. So all that would happen is you'd have these people that enter a restaurant with their face masks on. They then kiss each other on the face mask. They then go sit down and take the face masks off, and then they put them all over the tables. If that's not a spread of transmission of coronavirus, I don't know what will be. That's my own personal view. Clearly, you've got to follow the law. People who are exempt still remain exempt from the face coverings rules, so just be aware of that. A new rule that's come out that frankly this guidance, but the government has said that businesses must remind people to wear face coverings where they are mandated to do so. So we've had a number of shops come out there. Asda have said this week, haven't they, that they've got a whole set of don't know what you call them, COVID marshals who are going to be persuading people to put on a face mask. Previous to that, you have the likes of the cooperative group that said they wouldn't challenge people not wearing a mask. I think what you've got to be wary of as an employer is people will have exemptions. There will be disabilities amongst that. And if your staff are a bit overzealous, you could find yourself on the wrong end of complaints for disability discrimination. Hence, the exemptions exist. You've clearly now got an obligation to remind people to wear face coverings where it's mandated. You should probably do so, but you shouldn't be overzealous in how you do it. Obviously, businesses selling food or drink, cafes, bars, pubs, restaurants, social clubs, casinos, bowling alleys, amusement arcades, I could go on, must be closed between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Takeaways, that includes takeaways too, but they can do delivery service after 10 p.m. as from the 24th of September. In licensed premises, food must be served at a table. Food and drinks must be served at a table, and businesses are being asked to display the official NHS QR code posters so people can check in for the track and trace system. Areas of local intervention, I suppose this applies here in the northeast. Friends and family are entitled to come into your home to provide informal childcare cover. That was a change that was made. That wasn't originally in the local lockdown proposals, but has been brought in by the government since, mainly because a lot of grandparents look after children during the day and their parents therefore couldn't get back to work. Weddings and civil partnerships, ceremonies and receptions now down to 15 people from 30. That's probably everything that I had to rattle through in that. I don't know if Ailsa has any immediate last comments. Failing that, I will pass you back over to David.
No, nothing for me.
Thank you both. Just a quick reminder for me on content, relevant content, articles, podcasts, blogs, videos, all of which on our website, www.sintons.co.uk, should you wish to take a look. And this includes all episodes of the Q&A sessions, and I'll be uploading this session in about an hour's time. Twitter, you can also follow the employment team on Twitter for all the updates at Sintons HR. I've popped Ailsa and Keith's details back on the screen there. If you'd like to discuss anything that they've raised today further, please don't hesitate to get in touch with them or a member of the employment team. As I said, the details are there in front of you. Our next session will be Friday, 30th of October at 10 a.m. and I will send a link round to you all near the time. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in this morning, for continue to contribute to these sessions, and we very much look forward to seeing you on the 30th of October, 10 a.m. on Teams. And stay safe, everyone. Thank you.